my name is Pam Shaffer, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in Los Angeles. Thank you so much to Pineapple for inviting me to speak. Today I'm going to tell you about ADHD and how it might affect your life, how it might affect your work. So first off, I know that there are a lot of common misconceptions about ADHD. First off, that there's only one type. So the first thing I want to tell you is that there are actually two kinds of ADHD, and when I think about it, three, because there's one that's mixed. The first one is that ADHD can present with hyperactive features. So this means that not only might you have difficulty with sustained attention to task, but you might physically have to get up and move a lot. People describe this form as that you are powered by a motor. So you're on the go. You might feel fidgety a lot of the time. You might have to move around a whole bunch. It also is characterized by sometimes the inability to not speak over others. You might speak impulsively. You might talk a lot in conversation. You might have difficulty holding on to your thought until it's your turn. It also is seen with impulsive actions. So this means that once something occurs to you, you just feel the need to do it immediately. And you might, but unfortunately you don't think of the consequences till after. The other kind of ADHD is actually characterized by inattentive features. This one's a little different because this one is characterized by what looks typically a bit like forgetfulness or being scatterbrained. This might be that you start a task, but then you get distracted mid-task, then you start another task, but then you don't really finish either task. You may also forget what you need to actually complete a task. So if you're leaving the house, you might forget the things that you need for where you're going. You might experience difficulty starting tasks. This sometimes looks like you are overwhelmed before you even begin a task, so sometimes you avoid it. So hopefully this gives you a little bit of a taste of what the difference is between inattentive and hyperactive. And there's also mixed presentation. So this refers to people who demonstrate traits of inattentive ADHD as well as hyperactive. So know that it's not that you're necessarily one or the other, though you may display traits more of one than the other. I'd like to also talk about what ADHD is not. Sometimes in our culture, we get the message that ADHD is all about being super distracted and not able to attend to tasks. But ADHD comes with a really cool superpower, and that is hyperfocus. This means that people who have ADHD can focus even more intently on something that they're genuinely interested in. This can be great because if you're interested in something, it means you're going to focus 1,010% on it. The problem, unfortunately, is sometimes you can't determine where your hyperfocus goes. So if you get hyperfocused on the wrong task, you might get seriously derailed on some of your goals. Another misperception about ADHD is that it's only diagnosed in men or in boys. This is because originally when ADHD was studied, they focused a lot more on the hyperactive form of ADHD that usually presents with more disruptive behavior, whereas inattentive ADHD, a lot of times it comes across as what someone might describe as dreamy or a space cadet, but especially in children, this isn't considered a problem in classrooms. So oftentimes people with inattentive forms of ADHD are not diagnosed until later in their lives. That said, sometimes a diagnosis can help all the pieces slide into place. All these unrelated things in your life, all of a sudden, you're like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. If you suspect that you might have ADHD, it's a really good idea to talk to a professional. Talking to a therapist, such as a licensed marriage and family therapist like myself, or a social worker or a psychologist, can help you figure out if this diagnosis is right for you. ADHD can look like a lot of different things in your life. Some people that I've worked with have reported that they weren't sure what was going on, but that they felt like things just weren't coming together. So I'll describe to you some of the ways that ADHD might show up in your life. You might find that even when something sounds really fun, like something that you really enjoy doing, that you're really looking forward to, you delay doing it. You get distracted. You run late. You might forget what you need to bring with you to do the thing, but it's not that you don't want to do it. It might be something really fun, like going out with your friends, or watching a movie that you enjoy but you still delay it. This can also show up with inability to finish tasks, which can impact your academic life as well as your professional life. Sometimes if you're working on a project, you might feel overwhelmed by the amount of steps in it, and this in and of itself might feel like a hurdle you can't get over, and so you avoid the task. This happens a lot with people with ADHD because ADHD impacts what's called your executive functioning. So executive functioning refers to your ability to be able to organize steps and to put them in order and then do them in that order. With ADHD, it's really hard to hold all of these steps in mind, and that can cause stress because a lot of people are worried that they're not going to do something right or that they might mess it up. So this leads to what's called executive dysfunction, where essentially you either forget steps along the way or you become distressed in an attempt to actually complete all of the steps. Executive dysfunction can also show up in your personal relationships. Sometimes it's really hard to hold details in mind, and so if someone asks you to do a task, even if that task is really important to you and to the other person, you might actually forget to do it. This is also related to the way that working memory works for people with ADHD. So the concept of working memory is that when we are told something, it goes into our short-term memory. With a lot of people, this then filters into their long-term memory and they remember to do the task. With ADHD, working memory is often a bit faulty. This means that if someone asks you to do one task while you're in fact doing another, you might respond, yes, of course I'll do that. However, your working memory may not actually take that request from your short-term memory and put it into your long-term memory. So instead of actually dropping in so that you follow through on the task, it kind of just goes, boop, bounces right back out. Unfortunately, in personal relationships, this can actually make people feel like you didn't listen to them or you didn't care about the task. So that's a bit problematic. Another issue in regards to ADHD is time management. Oftentimes, I've heard from many of my clients with ADHD that time is a very slippery concept for them. When you're hyper-focused, a task may seem so exciting that time passes by with little impact at all. All of a sudden, it's nighttime, you've been working on something all day, you haven't paused to eat, you haven't paused to use the bathroom. It's so exciting to you. The only problem with this is that sometimes there's other obligations that you might have, or you might underestimate how much time certain tasks take, or conversely, you might overestimate how difficult a task may be because it may have an imposing number of steps to it or seem like something that might be difficult to accomplish. So oftentimes time management and organization are really important to people with ADHD because also they give you an external structure to work with so that you know what to expect and don't get overwhelmed having to think about all of the details. Another part of ADHD that has just come to light in new research is called rejection dysphoria. This is related to the emotional regulation piece of ADD that is also related to the executive dysfunction that's mainly related to the fact that ADHD affects this part of your brain, prefrontal cortex. That's where all of our emotions get regulated and where all of our task organization comes from. In regards to rejection dysphoria, this means that people with ADHD are particularly sensitive to either real rejection or even sometimes perceived rejection. This means that you might interpret signals of potential rejection as something nearly physically painful. Knowing that this is something that comes with ADHD is important because oftentimes people with ADHD will be ashamed of some of what they perceive as their deficits in regards to getting things done or managing their time, and they might in turn to people-pleasing or attention-seeking in order to receive the validation that they aren't getting elsewhere, and also in order to make up for the fact that they're feeling rejected. So be mindful of this. Know that if you are feeling rejected in a situation, that you can always check in with the other person, and that also the good news is that all feelings are temporary. This means that even if you might feel really strongly in the moment and see previous about not understanding time very well, know that the moment will pass. A really good way to remember this is knowing that you didn't feel this way forever. If you can think back to another time that you didn't feel the way that you're feeling in the moment, that means logically you're going to feel differently in the future. So even if your feeling feels pretty bad, you know that logically it'll pass, and eventually it does. This takes a lot of practice, so Know that it's not easy, but that you can totally do it. Having ADHD might affect you in the adult industry in several ways. The first off is that you might have difficulty organizing all of your commitments. Oftentimes when you're working in this industry, there's a lot of different appointments to remember and a lot of different forms to fill out. If you're getting paid through different people, there's a lot of different things to remember in regards to how to contact people. So know in advance that you might have to put extra effort into actually organizing your business. This means keeping a calendar. This means making sure to be accountable to yourself in order to write things down. Know that the logistics of the business are challenging for everybody, but they might be a little more challenging for you because it does require remembering several different steps. Know that it's okay if this is hard for you, and don't feel ashamed about it. Be open with people if you can about having ADHD. And if people don't know what that means, you can explain to them what's explained in this video, whether you're inattentive or hyperactive or both. You can explain to them that it just means that sometimes there's a few extra challenges for you in regards to organization and holding on to details. Other ways that it might affect you are in some of your personal relationships in this industry. Because hyperfocus is such a wonderful thing, you might be hyper-focused on one task in the industry. You might really love making videos. You might love working one-on-one with people. You might love filming scenes. And so that's really great. But know that in regards to that, there are also organizational details that go around that. So you might be hyper-focused on filming scenes, but then also know that you need to get them online in a good amount of time, or you might need to market them to people. So there are tasks that might go along with it that you also need to focus on. I know that this is challenging, so make sure that even if you're hyper-focused on one aspect of your work, that you are still attending to the others. The reason why is that oftentimes really in any field, if you're hyper-focused on one portion of your work and the other slide, you might not actually be able to finish your work in the way that you would want or distribute it in the way that you want, and that can feel really discouraging. In regards to rejection dysphoria in the sex work industry, know that oftentimes in this field, we are very reliant on the approval of others. So if you are putting work, say, online, or you are receiving any sort of feedback, know that you might be very sensitive to negative commentary about this. And having that knowledge about yourself, though it won't help people saying positive or negative things, unfortunately, it will help you understand your reaction better and know that you don't have to seek 100% approval from people. Know that rejection hurts everybody, but that you might be slightly more sensitive to it, and take this into account when you're receiving feedback on your work. So this can be very difficult for people who are in the public sphere, especially people who utilize social media to present their work. Knowing this about yourself can help you take care of yourself when it happens, so that you don't beat yourself up, so that you don't feel ashamed if someone is not enthused about your work. Know that that is part of your brain, part of how your body reacts to that. It might feel very, very painful, but know that it will pass. And know that you don't have to please everybody. That's one aspect that, especially people who are diagnosed later in their life, like in their late teens, in their 20s, in their 30s, upward. There are people who haven't been diagnosed until their 40s or 50s that all of a sudden realize that a lot of their actions were taken earlier in their life to avoid rejection and to avoid the overwhelming feeling that can sometimes come over you when you're taking on a task that has too many steps. It's important to know this piece for emotional regulation. Be aware that ADHD can actually be really helpful in this field. Oftentimes, people who have ADHD have the capacity to think of things in what some describe as outside the box. This is because oftentimes, if you have a bunch of ideas swirling in your mind and you hyperfocus on some of them, you might end up on a more unconventional route than someone who simply follows through on, point A, point B, point C. So know that this actually works to your advantage. This means that you might think of ideas that are more creative than others. You might think of ideas that are innovative. You might be able to hyper-focus or come up with ideas that someone who has what one would consider a more neurotypical brain to be really unusual and striking. This is something that most people with ADHD consider a very positive aspect. So take advantage of that. Know that you can contribute in really meaningful ways that someone who might think in a more linear manner does not. Also know that ADHD sometimes will happen in conjunction with other issues. And some of these are depression, anxiety, other potential mood issues, as well as sleep issues. This is important to know because you might be experiencing some of these symptoms. You might be experiencing what you believe is anxiety or perfectionism, and it might come down to the fact that you have ADHD and have felt ashamed about work that you haven't finished or relationships that you didn't follow through on. You might be feeling depressed for similar reasons. Also, sleep disorders are very common with people who have ADHD. This often has to do with the arousal levels in people who have ADHD, so that means kind of more of how you're processing things in your environment. You might get overwhelmed easily in your environment or overstimulated, and that makes you feel confused and are kind of stirred up in a way, and oftentimes this can make it difficult to fall asleep. So this might present as insomnia or delayed sleep phase disorder. So be aware of those and never feel ashamed of contacting a mental health provider. People, I believe, in our society in some ways have destigmatized mental health, but I think that it should be talked about in the same way that we do physical health, the same way that we do, frankly, even something like car maintenance. Everybody deserves to have care. Everybody deserves to learn more about themselves and to learn the best way to take care of themselves and others around them so that they can thrive. Thank you so much for taking a listen. Thank you again to Pineapple for being able to sponsor such a wonderful series of videos so that everyone can learn more about themselves and about others, so that ultimately we can lead our best lives and have empathy for those around us. Thank you again.